consider a lesson as a journey. Then, the lesson plan is the teacher's map of what the students need to learn and how can this learning be achieved effectively during the class time. Today, in this video, we'll learn together how to design a detailed map that won't let you get lost while achieving your final goal. We'll learn together how to design a perfect lesson plan. This question is probably the most importantly asked question that I usually hear from other EFL/ESL teachers, especially novice ones. And the question that I frequently receive in my Facebook page inbox: can you please share with us a model of your personalized lesson plan? What are the steps needed while designing a good lesson plan? Today, I'll answer all of your questions about lesson planning: what to do, what not to do, and how to do it most importantly, using primarily my background knowledge from my CELTA course, which gave me all the tools that I needed to prepare a good lesson plan. And of course, my teaching experience, which enabled me to practice and test my teaching effectiveness. So after watching this video, you'll be able to design, to adapt and adjust the following steps to any lesson plan you want. Okay, so without wasting time, let's have a closer look at my personalized lesson plan model. So, primarily I advise you to mention all the personal information about you, including your name, of course, to show that it's your personal work. The date of course, the school year, the unit, sequence, rubric of the lesson, the level. For my case, for example, it's dedicated to third-year secondary school students of the literary stream. The length of your lesson, how will this lesson take from my time? For example, this year we have 60 minutes. Last year we had only 45 minutes. So we have to adjust our lesson according to the time allowance we have and the number of your students, which of course varies from one class to another. After that, we move on to the most important part of this cover page, which is the main aim, or as we call it, the intermediate objective. What is the intermediate objective? It's mainly a learning objective that describes what the learner will know or do by the end of the lesson. Now, how can I state or create my learning objectives? Briefly, I advise you to write SMART objectives. Remember, SMART objectives. S for specific, throughout the use of clear, direct language to tell the learner exactly what he or she would be able to do after the lesson. M for measurable, throughout the use of action verbs, which are already stated in Bloom's taxonomy of higher order thinking skills. If you don't know about it, just Google action verbs of Bloom's taxonomy and you'll have everything between your hands. A for attainable, something that they can achieve in relation to their background knowledge and language competencies. R for relevant to the unit they are studying and tightly linked with the previous lesson and the upcoming one. T for time bound, which has to be limited to a specific period of time, which is mainly the case for 60 minutes within the Algerian context. In my case, by the end of the lesson, my students will be able to develop their listening comprehension skills and expand their vocabulary in the context of ancient civilizations. So, must be repeated expressions, students will be able to. After that, you write the action verb, which is related to your lesson, in the context of course. Every lesson should have a context. Secondly, we got subsidiary aim, which is the second aim. You can write it as you can omit it, you're free, but it's preferable to be mentioned. For example, in this lesson, by the end of it, my students will have practiced speaking based on their understanding of the listening comprehension. So for the subsidiary aim, it can be either for practicing speaking or writing, depending on the skill we have between our hands. After that, the competencies, which is the case for interacting, interpreting, producing, and functions, if you'd love to add them. Now we go to the background. One of the most important things that have to be mentioned in the background in the class profile. Developing your learner profile can help you improve your teaching. Plan learner-centered activities and support your classroom management. This should generally include the number of students, age, and level, of course. Gender, how many males, how many females do you have in your class? Language proficiency for all language skills, language experience, for how long time have they been studying English, and of course, motivation. Kind of topics, texts, techniques, activities, technologies that do motivate this group of learners. For example, my students are of an Algerian nationality, aged between 17 and 19 years old. The language experience is 6 years, whereas the level is intermediate. And what do they love while studying? For example, the case of realia, songs, games, etc., etc. Now we go to the assumptions. What can you assume about this class? Why will your lesson work with them? Of course, here you give reference to their background knowledge, things that they have already dealt with and they have studied in the previous years. For example, here the past simple tense is something that I think all of them are already familiar with. Next, we go to the personal aims. What are personal aims? As teachers, we all want to grow. That's why we like to make professional development goals for ourselves, to take action points and reflect on our negative teaching practices. For me, it's always the time realistically to finish my lesson on time. That's perfection. And of course, to reduce my TTT, teacher talk time, since I talk a lot. Now we go to the timetable for what lessons have come before my lesson and what are coming after, and how am I going to link, these lessons with each other's. Background, using anticipated problems, of course. What could go wrong with my lesson? So you have to think of topics, materials, activities, equipment, solutions that you need to solve any occurring problem during your lesson, especially sometimes the use of IT. You are planned to have a PowerPoint presentation and sometimes anything can happen. Of course, for example, I'll keep a hard copy of the audio on my phone, for instance, for my listening lesson. The materials you're going to need for this lesson, of course, they have to be prepared, especially if you are having personalized materials which are different from the ones existing in the textbook. So you have a lot of work to do: printables, map, audio, phone speakers, handouts, etc., etc., and the whiteboard plan, which is important. How are you going to plan your whiteboard? So most of the time, the middle of the board is for the lesson itself. You're going to write, of course, the date, unit, sequence, rubric, and the tasks, especially the correction of the tasks. If you are going to give them handouts, if they are from the textbook, they already have the tasks. The sideboards always try to specify one for the predicted and the immersion. For example, here, as you see, the immersion vocabulary and the follow-up errors that may achieve or may occur in the lesson. Now we go to the lesson itself. What am I going to include in my lesson? Of course, the first thing, you can write them one after the other, as you can do it in the form of a table. Personally, I prefer the table since I find it quite organized and it helps me to be effective in my lesson. The first thing I'd love to mention is the stage name. So what are the stages I'm going to go through in my lesson? For example, here, my lesson is a listening one. So, of course, the warming up, I didn't mention it here. Leading, the pre-listening, the while listening, which includes listening for gist and listening for details, and the post-listening task. Next, we go to the stage aim. So each stage should have an aim. What are these aims? What are you, or why are you doing this stage? For example, for the lead-in, to introduce the topic of the lesson and the theme of the unit, in my case. And the procedure, what will the teacher do? Describe in sufficient details that another teacher would teach this lesson. Okay, so try to mention as much details as you can in this part to be able to follow the lesson plan if you forgot any detail. For example, teacher welcomes her students, teacher projects the map of ancient civilizations and asks students some questions about it to get their predictions. Even the questions are mentioned here. What do you see? Is this map about the present or the past? Does it show countries of civilizations? How did you know? Etc, etc. The materials now needed for each stage. What am I going to use? For example, in the lead-in stage, I'm going to use a map. And of course, the interaction patterns for each stage. Interaction patterns should vary from one stage to another. As you see, teacher, students, students, teacher, teacher, students, 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 teacher, etc, etc. And the time, minutes per stage, to be able to control your lesson and finish it on time. For example, for the lead-in, 5 minutes, the pre-listening task, 10 minutes, listening for just 10 minutes, details 15 minutes, and the post-listening is 12 minutes. By the end, I'm gonna do a follow-up activity to raise my students' awareness about the language use, the case for writing some errors on the board, and asking my students whether the written sentences are correct or not. So they try to correct them collectively on the board. Finally, I always save this place for comments, things that worked really in my lesson plan and things that didn't work. What should I do? I should improve them for my upcoming lesson or my next year, of course. We are learning from our mistakes, and this is the most important thing. When you are aware about what you are doing, you have that sense of reflection to reflect on yourself, to be able to achieve the final goals or the intermediate objective that we have previously stated. So, after watching my video about lesson planning and having a closer look at all the details I've tried to provide you with briefly as concerned with lesson planning, now you are able to prepare your perfect lesson plan model, your personalized version. Just take the initiative and start doing that. I'm sure you'll be surprised with the effectiveness you'll be able to achieve in your classes after realizing this in your teaching. Thank you very much for watching, and if you have any questions about this video or my previous videos or any upcoming video topics that you'd love me to talk about, please leave me a comment below and invite your friends to subscribe to my channel if you see that the job I'm working is worth sharing with others. Thank you very much.